Hi, Mike Kennedy. We're going to load film in the Minolta 16 camera. This is a camera. They're really built really sturdy. They're very heavy metal. There's not much to go wrong in them. They have shutter speeds from B to 500 and 2. This B to 500 and 2.8 to f16. It's a fixed focus, but we'll talk a little more about that later. You open the camera by pressing this indent, and you press it again to separate the outer housing from the camera. Now see that little metal piece that's sliding out? That's going to be important later on. And you fumble with the case a little. Like, I need better fingernails here. Okay, we get that open to show you. You can see here there's a take-up spool on the right and an empty place on the left. Now here's an actual film box of what this film looked like, developed before July 81. So if there was film in this, we wouldn't be using it. We're not. This is just a saved cartridge. Sometimes these Minolta cartridges are worth more than the cameras because the cameras are really rugged. There's a lot of them around, but there isn't a lot of these cartridges because they're plastic, they're thin, so they're, a little on the flimsy side. So this is the supply side. The other side is the take-up supply. You can see there's a little spool in here, and it actually has gears inside of it. There's that are going to be used by this right-hand side, if I flip it over correctly, and it's going to be used to wind the film back in every time you take a shot. The winding's going to be accomplished by opening and closing the camera. So now we need some film, and luckily I have purchased some film, some 16 millimeter Ektar 100 custom cut. In other words, Kodak doesn't make it in this size. Someone's got a film slitter and they slit this out and they sold it to me. I'll try to put a link in the bottom to where I originally purchased it from. There are different dealers that do these. So now we're going to have to get that film into that little plastic cartridge. So you really want to download the instruction manual. Here's just showing the steps where we're going to wind it in a spool. We're going to tape it onto that take-up spool, and then we're going to put it back all together. Here's my changing bag. You'll notice that there's two zippers, an inner zipper and an outer zipper. This is to make sure that once you open the film, no light is going to strike it. It's really important. You can see the cuffs have elastics in them, where I'm going to stick my arm. And here's a pro tip. While you're doing this in the dark, close your eyes. It's going to be a lot less confusing for your mind, because it will just go, your mind will go by feel and not realize it can't see things. It was in a little metal foil inside this paper wrapper, and it had this little kind of tape label on it that says Kodak Ektar 100. So this was packaged really well by the person that I got it from. And I'll check the price again, but I think it was $5 or $6. So here you can see we've got the film sticking out. So now what we have to do is we've got to get it onto that take-up spool. So we're going to pull some of that over. We're going to get some tape to tape on there. It's a good idea to tape, and I don't do this till later, but you want to tape the supply side cassette closed so it doesn't pop open on you. Now if you look closely on this, you'll be able to see the gears in there. Those are going to mesh with the metal gears that are on the take-up side of the camera. Now to get a piece of scotch tape, I had to cut the scotch tape down because it was too wide. In other words, it's wider than 16 millimeter. So get some tape. We're going to cut it. This is quite a fiddly process here because you got to realize there's only so much room for everything. So if you use too much tape and things, that you're going to end up in problems. So you don't want to use a whole lot of it if you can. And so I'm going to use this. I'm going to tape a part of that on the film, and then I'm going to tape it on the take-up spool. it's always good to know that the shiny side of the film is the base side and the duller side is the emulsion side. And so you want that duller side to the back of the cassette and the shiny side to the back of the cassette and the dull side facing towards the front where the camera lens is, because you don't want you want the lens to hit the image, to hit the emulsion, not go through the base. So it's important that you, this came curled the right way, so there shouldn't be a problem with that. But if you're loading your own, maybe it could get curled the wrong way. So you could look at the film after you've taken it out and make sure that's true. Here we've got the little take-up spool. And first I put it in backwards, which isn't going to work at all, because putting it in that way, it's never going to mesh with the gear. So I realized that I kind of did that wrong. I'm showing you some of my mistakes because I make plenty of mistakes, and hopefully you can learn from my mistakes and not make them yourself. See, I've got this on and I realize, wait a second, it can't mesh with the gears. There's those little inner things that are going to mesh with the gears on the camera. So we're going to try again. Try to, line this up really well so everything's centered well and there isn't extra tape going anywhere. I found it kind of fiddly to try to get this film in through this. There's a narrow passageway on each end of the cassette that the film has to go through, and that's so that the film will be, the cartridge will be light tight. Now, I suppose eventually these cartridges might become less than light tight, and you might have to do them and load them and unload them in darkness. I don't know. But there I get it in. And like I say, at this point, I would definitely be taping the cassette up on both sides, and I don't do that till a little later. And it worked out for me that I didn't have a problem, but you could have a problem. So you can see I've got it on the supply side, but not the take-up reel. So we want to do that. There's a take-up sprocket. Now, it's going to be important. You're going to see me fiddling with this quite a number of times, because what's happened is I haven't, see step 7 with that little thing that pulls out, we need to jiggle that a little so that when we drop in step 4, the cassette will be completely flush with the camera. There'll be no space. And what you'll see here, me not realizing that I've been doing it wrong. And I put the cassette in, it just doesn't close properly, and I'm thinking, gee, what's the matter here? What have I done? And I should have looked at the directions. And because they tell you what you didn't do right. You can see here, see that it isn't in all the way? And I press that in, and it's not laying flat. So what's happened is the plastic in the cassette hasn't meshed with the take-up spool. And again, that little piece of metal you see sticking out is a solution. Now here's showing that we've got to get the S to the middle portion. There's a mark there where we want the letter S for the start of the winding here. You may not be able to see that super closely. There's a red S there. But see that plate that's sticking out? That's what you're going to have to jiggle a little to really get that cassette to drop in and be perfectly aligned with those gears. Otherwise, you're going to see me try, and I'm not going to be able to close this thing at all until I figure out what I've done wrong. Maybe I should have cut that all out, but I just thought sometimes seeing the mistakes are more valuable than not seeing them. If I had just done it perfect the first time or cut out my mistakes, you might be doing it and say, hey, what's the matter? And one time I crimped the film up too much, so I had to pull the film out a little more. You can see I'm having trouble trying to get it in, because that film gate where the film is going is pretty narrow. And still, see, it's just not setting in there. So, like I say, I'm eventually going to figure out that I'm going to jiggle that little plate that was sticking out back and forth a little, and that's going to move the gears inside the camera. Now see, it's perfectly flush. There's nothing sticking up, which is the way it's supposed to be. See how flat that closed? And that was because I moved that little metal plate that's sticking out. Now I'm going to have to go back and move it so that the S is at the dot, the start of the film, the red S. And then I'm just going to put the casing back on. It's going to stop twice. It's going to stop where there's a bump here. And I'm going to do it. Click it over. Then you push it in. Now we're going to open and close it twice. And what that does is that's going to advance the film, so we've got a nice piece of unexposed film behind the camera lens. So now we're all set to go. And we'll talk about actually taking pictures with it too. I've got some interesting accessories to explain.